Ladies and gentlemen and members, good morning. We are live. Welcome to this meeting of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority, clearly being held at our Fire and Police Shared Headquarters in Eastleigh. We are being recorded for broadcast on the authority's website and will be available for repeated viewing. The press and members of the public are also permitted to film and broadcast this meeting, so those remaining at the meeting are consenting to being filmed and recorded and to the possible use of your images and recordings for broadcasting purposes. There is no scheduled fire alarm today. In the event of a fire alarm going off that way, follow someone in uniform into the car park. Microphones, you know how they work. Please put them on when you're talking and don't forget to turn them off, because they do. If you leave it on, it does dilute the strength of everything else. So, agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Katie, please.
We've received apologies from Councillor Karen Lucioni and Councillor Cal Corkery.
Apologies. Okay, thank you. Item number 2, declaration of interest. Any? No? Thank you. Item 3, the minutes from the last meeting on the 4th of October. Does anyone have anything to raise from the minutes? No? Okay. Yeah. Yep. Deputations. Any deputations? No? Good. Right, item 5, Chairman's announcements, of which there are bucket loads. Right, first off, the Prince's Trust 20-year celebration, which was held here on the 18th of November. Supporters of the programme, past and present, were invited to celebrate the remarkable achievements during 20 years of delivering this service. The National Fire Service Prince's Trust Liaison Officer, George Martin, was presented the Chief Fire Officer, Neil, with a special service award to commemorate the service's commitment to the Prince's Trust over the 20 years. The service's Prince's Trust team have delivered 131 teams and helped to improve the lives of nearly 2,000 young people by inspiring them to reach further and fulfill their potential. And it was a cracking good celebration. I remember, who was there? You were, I was, you were. Very good turnout, thank you, members. And it continues to be an absolute joy and somewhat highly emotional events. And long may they continue, and we are doing extremely well at it. Chief, any?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the authority for your ongoing support with this really important work. People tend to think of the Fire and Rescue Service as the obvious blue light frontline part, but the amazing amount of work we do with your support across the community, and particularly young people, is a particularly key target audience of ours, and that many lives touched and improved, we know for sure, has got to be an accolade to the people involved. So thank you for your support.
Okay, thank you. The National Fire Chiefs Council, the NFCC, Celebrating Prevention Awards were held on the 10th of November and recognised and celebrated the achievements of prevention activity in fire and rescue services across the country. Our service's Children and Young People's team were highly commended in the Children and Young People's Award category. The Children and Young People's team, alongside our incredible volunteers, work very, very hard to support vulnerable children and young people in our communities to stay safe and to achieve their full potential. So well done, the team, and particularly Karen, who works her socks off doing this sort of thing. And members, to you, because Karen speaks to me the whole time saying just how thrilled she is that we, the members, actually turn up and support her. And so thank you for doing that. On that note, while I've got you here, strapped, I just want to check that we've got, on the 7th, next Wednesday, we've got a Gosport Cadets Passing Out Parade at 7 o'clock. Is anybody going to that? Gosport, thank you. Zoe, good. And we have also, on the 4th of December, sorry, 14th, thumbs in the way. 14th of December, we got a Prince's Trust in Basingstoke. I'm going to that. Anyone else going? You are? Good. Okay. On the 15th, we've got a Prince's Trust in the Isle of Wight, which I'm going to. And we've got a 6 o'clock at Redbridge Fire Station, which you're going to. Thank you, Tony. And then I think that's it for until it starts again in July. So thank you for your contributions and for attending these things. Remembrance Sunday, an Armistice Day service for remembrance was held here at the fire station where I laid a wreath on behalf of the authority. Also on Remembrance Sunday, services across the county, including our service and alongside fire cadets from around the country, represented to commemorate the end of the First World War and to pay their respects to all fallen soldiers who sacrificed their lives in countless wars on the Remembrance Parade at the Cenotaph in London. Which is good to see. I mean, as you know, I'm rather involved in this, and it always strikes me that if we write on all our monuments lest we forget, there are things we have to do to make sure that we don't forget. And I think that is very, very important. Neil, anything on that?
Just to say, Chairman, it's something which we plan for every year. We also had a member of our staff in the Albert Hall at the event there as well. It's a real privilege to be invited to not only the Cenotaph but also to the Albert Hall. So it's great to see Hampshire Wight Fire and Rescue Service taking part in that really important memorial.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Right. Let me just talk about the independent cultural review of the London Fire Brigade. I'm sure you've read this and are deeply concerned about the content of this report on the London Fire Brigade. We will want to assure ourselves that similar conditions do not exist within our own organisation. The Chief and his team will be working with their teams to ensure that each of the questions that are raised by the report are considered by the organisation. We will then receive a report providing further insight at a future meeting. Do you want to add to that, Chief?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm sure members like us would have been horrified to read the report, and I know that the Commissioner of London has very bravely commissioned that report with the Deputy Mayor to ensure that there's no stone left unturned. Clearly, in any organisation, there's things we can do, and we will look very closely at our own organisation, and we have been over the last period anyway. And Molly and her team will certainly be looking to reflect the key findings to make sure that we understand how they affect our organisation, and our staff will be very much engaged in that conversation also. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anyone want to raise anything on that? No? Okay. An update on the industrial action, which is pending. The ballot of FBU members for firefighters and fire control staff over whether to accept a 5% pay offer from employers closed on the 14th of November. Following the rejection of a 5% pay offer by FBU members, FBU General Secretary Matt Rack wrote a letter to the Chair and Secretary of the employer's side of the National Joint Council, the NJC, for local authority fire and rescue services. A letter was also sent to all chief fire officers to notify them of their intention to issue a notice of ballot if a substantial pay offer was not made by the 28th of November 2022. A ballot on strike action by FBU members was opened yesterday, Monday the 5th of December, and will close on Monday the 30th of January. Whilst we want an agreed outcome, clearly with a substantial level of pay for our great staff, it is outside our control and can only be resolved via the NJC. The service is now working on its plans to continue delivery of our vital public service during periods of reduced staff availability. Chief, do you want to add?
Adding to, I said just now about cultural challenges for all organisations, obviously working with organisational culture at a time of trade dispute is a double problem for us as leaders. So clearly we are working very closely with our colleagues in the FBU leadership, and we're working with all of our staff to recognise their right to take legitimate action should they wish to, but also to recognise our role in making sure that the service continues to function. And we have key teams working through our preparations for that. Now, I cannot give you any assurance that everything's going to be fine, because clearly losing a large chunk of your staff to industrial action has a massive impact on our ability to deliver. but I will keep you updated on the level of that ability to deliver over the coming weeks as we get more detail and more information. Now, clearly the ballot opens today, and so we won't know the outcome of that ballot until the end of January, so we'll have more information at that point. The ballot clearly reads, are you prepared to take part in industrial action consistent of strike action? There's nothing else on the ballot. That is the question members are being asked, FE members have been asked to consider. And so clearly our job is to make sure our staff feel safe, confident to make their choices, but equally that so we plan ahead for any future return to work, but also managing through a potential industrial action. And the outcome of that ballot obviously is a matter for FBU members, but we'll keep you cited on your legal role as the Fire and Rescue Authority to make sure we can still deliver a service of some sort. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple more things. Sorry.
Can I just ask, is the ballot on a national strike, or because it appears like in the NHS they've gone for regions, and some regions or some areas, some hospitals are not going to strike, so but the Fire Brigades Union has gone for a national strike rather than services. So you couldn't get one service saying it doesn't want to strike and so therefore running normally.
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that we've asked. I'm far from an expert, but I understand that it is to the union to decide how it wants to do things. It can either go per employer, or it can go on a national basis, and often that's a tactical decision by the union. The Fire Brigades Union has decided on a national ballot, so that's how it stands.
Okay, thank you. Now, we've got a team doing an Atlantic row. Madness. But the chief will explain what it is.
Yes, just to wish them a fair wind and following seas, I think the phrase is. I'm looking at naval colleagues over there. But we've got two of our colleagues that are, for some amazing reason, decided to set off across the Atlantic in a Talisker challenge. They set off this week, I believe. So, you know, our good wishes go with them. And, you know, we'll wonder why they did it when they finish, perhaps. But that's something they're doing, raising money for Mine Charity, and I think the Firefighters Charity as well. So, you know, good luck to them, and obviously we'll be watching their progress as they travel across the Atlantic. Thank you, Chairman.
And lastly on this one, yes, sir.
Just to say, I put my son-in-law, who together with 3 other RAF pilots did that row last year, in touch with the couple from your organisation that are doing it this year. There should be a website that you can actually plot the progress of everybody and where they are in relation to the other people taking part. And it is actually quite a good affair.
Thank you, Keith. And lastly on this bit, I've just signed a letter to Teresa Coffey re the issue of lithium battery storage, which was something which was raised by Dame Maria Miller MP, and then perhaps the chief would like to expand on that.
Yeah, just briefly, thank you, Chairman. You may be aware of a growing tendency for lithium-ion battery storage to be built in our communities, around our communities. Now, in themselves, obviously, a fantastic bit of technology, but they, for firefighting purposes, sadly, they do occasionally catch fire, and when they catch fire, they suffer from a phenomenon known as thermal runaway, and incredibly hard to put out without lots and lots of water. And so the challenge we have is, one, knowing where they are planned to be built, and making sure that either the planning authorities or indeed the regulation around them, which is at this stage we think too light in terms of deciding where they go, where they don't go, needs to consider the impact of our activities if we were to try and put them out in a fire. So copious amounts of water. Clearly, if they're near a watercourse, the runoff could be difficult, could be dangerous. And for our ability to actually put them out in the first place, we need good access and good ability to reach them. So we've asked, as part of a national campaign, we've asked for leaders of all our local authorities to write to the Secretaries of State, just to ask for their consideration to be given to further either regulation, but certainly more inclusion in the planning process, to include fire and rescue services as consultees, and our ability to have some influence on the outcomes of decisions about where they're built, because currently it's quite light. Great example of technology running ahead of regulation and understanding about what might occur. So the letter will go with the Chairman's signature on behalf of the Fire Authority, as we're asking also for all local authorities to do the same, and many have done that already, local authorities. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks. Yes, Keith.
May I suggest that someone contacts the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority? This particular problem was highlighted 7 or 8 years ago when they tried to put lithium batteries in the first new, I think it was the Dreamliner. So actually, the knowledge is there. It just needs people to get out of their silos and look at where it's been solved, because it has been solved. So my view is send a copy of your letter to the chairman of the CAA or the chief executive asking about what they do. And we can lead the way on this one, because I think the department that we're writing to, I don't think they're aware of what's going on across Whitehall in the Department of Transport.
Thank you, Keith. Very helpful. Thank you. Yes, Roger.
Are we also not writing to the planning officers of every local authority, highlighting the difficulties which we would have in fighting a fire, and asking them to consider those situations should a planning application ever come in their area, and also to refer that planning application to the fire service to look at to see if it is satisfactory from our side?
Thank you, and that's very much the thrust of the letter. So that's where I went to chief executives for one letter to go to the Secretary of State from the leaders of those councils, but equally to go back into the organisation. The difficulty they've got is the ability, as you'll know, with planning rules, the ability to influence the outcome if there's no setting controls in place, which there seems to be very few. Because we are concerned about watercourses, we are concerned about the knock-on to communities that they may be near. So yeah, that's very much the thrust of the letter. What the impact a fire would have, and then our impact on that should we attack it.
You need to have the legislation changed so the planning department or planning committee can actually make it a condition, and etc., etc. But also, if local authorities are highlighted to it, they can actually take.
As a guest on this authority, Donna, welcome. You wanted to say a few things?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of updates if I can. You may have noticed that we are now aligned with yourselves in terms of the fact the Isle of Wight is now formally, officially, legally recognised in the name of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary, and that was as of the 7th of November, and we have had a launch on the Isle of Wight with the Lord Lieutenant there to formally announce that. I know you've got your own budget report today, just to let you know that our budget consultation closed on Friday last week. We've had 8,400 responses to that, with 56% of people supporting the maximum increase. And I haven't decided to do that, but just so that you know what the police are looking at the moment in terms of our financial situation. In terms of the pay rise for the police for next year, that has been budgeted at 3%, and this year police staff was 3%. That became effective from September, and police officers was a fixed £1,900 increase, which for some would have been a little over 3%, but for many it would have been under. We're now committed to attending 100% of domestic burglaries. I would like to place on record thanks to yourself and the Chief Fire Officer for the part that you both played in the recruitment of our new Chief Constable. Chief Constable Scott Chilton, who is the current Chief in Dorset, 28 years Hampshire officer, who is returning to Hampshire on the 23rd of February as our Chief Constable, and Olivia's last day is the 22nd of February, and that will be communicated in due course as well. We have just finished our HMIC PL inspection, and we are looking at that being published in March. So be happy to share some information with your panel members in due course if you wish. We are running a Greening the Estate and electrification of the fleet programme at the moment, and needless to say we'll be talking to Matt and Aaron in your estates team, because you are slightly further ahead of us in your electrification programme, which is good to see. The Police Uplift programme is going well, and we are on course to hit our 600 by March of next year, 600 new officers, which is good. And finally, to thank you to Deputy Chief Fire Officer Chancellor for the Emergency Services Day, which we celebrated together.
Good, thank you, Donna. Just something I've noticed. The abbreviation for Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority, what's the proper word for that? The abbreviation? Acronym, that's the one. Is HIWFRA without the O. I have noticed that the O creeps in an awful lot. What's yours? Sorry to put you on the spot.
We don't have one yet. Normally we're HC for Hampshire Constabulary, but it's a bit of a mouthful to be HIOWC. So I don't know. We haven't come up with one yet. So.
Well, if you could leave the O out.
Okay, fine, no problem. Duly noted.
Then we're all on the same sheet.
Okay.
That would be lovely. Thank you. Right, moving on to members' developments, item 6. Quite a lot of us, me, the Chief, Donna, Tony, Stu Adamson, Cal went to the emergency service, carol service in Winchester Cathedral last Wednesday, which was a cracker. It was a wasn't it, Donna? It was a really, really very good, joyous, happy event. And Stu Adamson read a lesson, or a poem, or something. Didn't it?
It was Jason.
Oh, it was Jason, yeah. Sorry. Well, you should have done. So that was a good event. Last night I was here together with Tony at the Eastleigh Fire Cadets passing out parade, which again, great, wonderful attendance, and Stu ran that. So that's about what I've been doing. Members, any? David?
Yeah, along with Tony Bundy, we attended the Local Government Association leadership course. When I told my wife I was being sent to Coventry, she said, no surprise there. In fact, it was Warwick. And it was, I have to say, we were very well looked after. It's a wonderful facility they've got there. I was expecting sort of youth hostel type accommodation, but it was more like, you know, a medium-rated hotel. And the dining was very good. Students undertaking catering courses did all the necessary for us. And the content was very interesting as well. An old dog like me can learn a few things. And, you know, there was a lot to do with the importance of scrutiny and different leadership styles, which is always interesting when you come back into the different organisations and compare and contrast. There seems to be no one perfect way of leading people, Chairman.
That's the trouble, isn't it? Because they're people. They're all different. Good. Anyone else? Zoe?
Yes, just to say, Chairman, I met with the Children and Young People's team to look at both the cadets and the Prince's Trust and their offer and opportunities and their curriculum. I've got a follow-up meeting this afternoon with them. I also attended a school to actually have a look at the delivery of their fire safety programme in primary schools, so that was fantastic as well. Thank you.
And you, yes, Keith, you had a point.
Yes, sticking to cadets, I'm a member, not as a councillor, of the South East Reserve Forces and Cadets Association, SERVCA for short, as on the executive. I've done that for some time. The police cadets are very much involved with that, and I've had a word with Neil and others to actually get the fire cadets engaged with that organisation, because I think it's really quite good. It's got quite good publicity across the county with the result, and I just feel the police cadets, the fire cadets should be seen in the same light as police cadets and cadets from the 3 armed services.
And we're going to go and head someone off of the pass, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you. Anyone else? Tony?
Thank you, Chair. On the 30th of October, I met with Ros Chad in my role as People Champion, as she'd been the previous champion, via Zoom to update myself on the work she'd been doing. On the 20th of October, I met with Ben Allen, who was then area manager for covering Southampton, to update myself on Southampton issues. Following that, I met with Warren Laureate, who is a watch manager but involved with some very interesting work jointly with the police in using soft influence through the medium of football to do work with knife crime in schools. That was particularly relevant because they've been doing work in a school where I'm a governor, where we've recently had a stabbing incident. On the 15th of November, I met with Paul Francis and John Amos to look at work around safeguarding, again with my People Champion lead, and the community work that the service is doing. Following that, I spent 2 hours in the control room, something I've done before. I do commend it to other Fire Authority members if you haven't done that yet. It's a really good insight into what the work's doing. And the work that we're currently doing for other 999 services, because you really see the responses we're making to other people. And you've mentioned some of the other things that I've done. I think for the record, Cal Corkery was also on the course we attended in Warwick. Yeah.
Good, thank you, Tony. Derek?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, operationally, I'm in the heart of the county, of course, in Tadley and Borkhurst, and I did visit recently Tadley Fire Station again. They're a remarkable station. Rarely is it open, or visibly open to the public, but the fact that they covered 90-odd call-outs in the same period as last year, where they only covered 60-odd, is truly amazing when they're dependent on getting the guys to the station within 4 minutes, and they deserve some credit for that. I am supporting Tadley Firefight. They have a firefighting fund there. They do charity work based on their Safe and Well programme. It seems to be a very local arrangement, and I'm supporting them this year with delving into my devolved councillor's budget. If anybody would like to help, of course, it's always appreciated. That's the first bit about Tadley. Second bit, I was unable to join Councillor Harrison and Tony Bunday in their luxury hotel in Warwick this time. Obviously, it's a good time was had by all, and an instructive time was had by all. Unfortunately, it clashed. I had to cancel because it clashed with a Hampshire County Council important meetings. I am trying to still go on a leadership course. I'm told by Jack that there's none available at the moment, or they're not running them at the moment in the new year, certainly on the fire leadership side. So I will be attending at the first opportunity. But in the meantime, Alex has invited me to participate in the local government pension scheme for firefighters course, which I gather is in February sometime. Alex? No? Right. I have accepted, not so sure though, because I sit on the Hampshire Pension Fund Board, and between you and me, the councillor's viewpoint is we stay well away with that and let the officers handle that administrative minefield. So that was that, and I look forward to Basingstoke Princess Trust as much as I enjoyed the one here. I'll be attending the one at Basingstoke next Wednesday, and that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, I am greatly encouraged by your involvement in all these assets that we go and visit, and I can tell you the people who you visit are hugely impressed and very thankful that you do take the time to go and visit them. So thank you. Right. Item 7, the modern slavery statement on page 9 of your pack, which is introduced by Shantha, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members of the Fire Authority. I'm very pleased to introduce this, the second year that the Fire Authority will publish its statement regarding its approach to doing everything that it can within its influence and control to combat modern slavery. So just as a reminder, where and when do we see this terrible thing happening? As the report says, modern slavery, which includes human trafficking, is the illegal exploitation of people for personal or commercial gain, and it can take various forms. Where do we actually see it within Hampshire? Well, with police figures that have been kindly shared with us, we saw over the last year, 21 to 22, 218 recorded instances of modern slavery, which, when you consider the overall figure of 172,000, according to my data, police incidents, it is a tiny fraction. Nevertheless, when you look at what modern slavery can constitute, it is an absolutely terrible thing. and very much our ability to influence it and prevent it within everything we do is a core purpose of, it's part of our core purpose of making our counties and our cities safer, and doing that in conjunction with our partners. So with respect to what we see as a fire and rescue service, whilst we frequently see and raise safeguarding concerns for children and adults, and we have recognised training and processes for doing that and referring, modern slavery concerns, according to our reporting, is not something that we have frequently come across. Our reporting says within the last 3 quarters we haven't seen that. That said, to raise awareness and for the Fire Authority to publish this puts it high on everyone's agenda. So what has happened since the last year when the Fire Authority last published the commitment against modern slavery? We've undergone an internal audit by the Southern Internal Audit Partnership, which concluded that we have a reasonable level of assurance for our systems and governance and control regarding the prevention of any modern slavery or trafficking within any of our business operations. And importantly, there is ability for staff to identify any suspicions through the course of their duties. We've rolled out specific training that ensures that all staff have current knowledge on what it is, how to identify it, and what they can do. And again, at a future Members' Awareness Day, we can absolutely make this available to members if that is something that is desired. Again, we continue to work with the Police and Crime Commissioners Modern Slavery Partnership and with other organisations to raise awareness across our communities and our organisations. So in terms of the appendix, which has the updated statement, what I want to draw your attention to is a small technical change within section 7, which, if you refer to the cover report, expands on a specific point regarding the national reporting mechanism and the authority's status in relation to that. What I want to assure you, though, is that we have recognised referral chains and procedures for reporting when it is witnessed, which is entirely separate to our safeguarding. And again, for reassurance, I want to lay it on record for the Fire Authority that every member of our service will know their specific responsibilities regarding safeguarding and also regarding modern slavery, and what action to take when they do encounter adults or children they believe to be at risk. So we will be able to use to report suspected modern slavery through the appropriate channels. And subject to Fire Authority approval, this statement will be post the meeting signed by the chairman and the chief fire officer and then published on our website, thus signalling the Fire Authority's intent to take positive steps to identify modern slavery wherever we encounter it.
Thank you, Shantha. Members, any questions? Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully agree with the statement, but I just wonder that in line 4, it says if slavery or human trafficking activity suspected through supply chain, it will be reported to Hampshire Constabulary. Okay, but by whom? Is that the responsibility of the individual who picks it up, or do they have to report it back to a senior member of the service who then reports it on? And I just want to be clear where the responsibility lies, so as to make sure nothing slips through the net.
I'll take that one. So absolutely, it would be the responsibility of the individual, and that would sort of fall in line with our safeguarding procedure as well. But I would also hope, and certainly following this, where we've placed on record the low reporting that we've had of modern slavery, that it would be escalated through management channels, because where it could exist within a supply chain, that's really important for us to understand and ensure then we adapt our systems to ensure that we don't encounter that.
Safeguarding, where is it there? Safeguarding, services safeguarding reporting procedure clearly sets out who reports what and what, where and who to.
Absolutely. Safeguarding training is an annual training requirement that everyone has to do, and there are different levels of detail in terms of the training rolled out, but we see safeguarding as everyone's responsibility. It's not just for people that are frontline and dealing with members of the public, but it is for every person. And certainly I can anecdotally speak of instances where staff within our organisation have had safeguarding concerns about other staff. So it's very much, just as much about focusing on the community as well as our organisation as well.
Tony.
Thank you for this. I thoroughly welcome it. I wonder if there'd been any incidences so far that this service has come across of modern day slavery, either in the supply line or in their work through the community.
That's something that we can come back to you on specifically.
David.
Chairman, I also welcome this, but it does strike me that there's quite a strong reliance on somebody reporting something. I just wonder, is there any sanction, way of disciplining people if they're found to have just turned a blind eye to something and not reported it? I know, for example, in the case of child abuse, there's a strong suggestion that people could be prosecuted if they knowingly decline to report something to the authorities.
Thank you for that question. So if I can draw your attention to section 5 in the appendix, which talks about the policies which underpin the statement, and specifically there's various codes of conduct that apply to individuals within the service, within the FAR authority. So absolutely, in terms of breach of conduct, then there could be appropriate sanctions that follow that breach.
Zoe, please.
Thank you. Just to clarify, if it's the individual's responsibility to report direct, can they not go to your DSO, your direct safeguarding officer? Is that how you would, because otherwise you wouldn't necessarily be able to report that. So that would be the reporting mechanism. And I think it would be useful for members maybe to be exposed to the training, to be able to scrutinise the statement. I think the same as safeguarding, it should be treated the same. And I think with our exposure with children and young people and with the community, I think members should go through that training. And similar to safeguarding, it would be good to see reporting quarterly or annually, I think, on those statistics.
I think just to add to that, I think very usefully, I think it's an excellent idea. Policy or direction sat here, the statement is set here, and you'd expect my team and teams to then put in the procedures to make sure we deliver against that policy. But I'm really happy to share our procedures, safeguard procedures, with the authority at perhaps an APAG meeting, just so you can have a look at them and understand them. But equally, as you quite rightly suggest, training here is also useful. So happy to do that at a future APAG.
Okay, thanks. Anything else on this paper, members? No? Chancellor, any closing remarks?
We look forward to it being signed and to work with members in terms of taking this forward together.
Okay, thanks. So if I can alert you to the recommendation on page 12 of your papers, which is that the Authority Modern Slavery Statement 22-23 at Appendix A be approved by the full authority and is subsequently published on the authority's website. Agreed? Okay, thank you. Moving to item 8, which is the 22-23 mid-year performance report, which is delivered by Shantha again.
Good morning again, everyone. On behalf of the service, I'm very pleased to present the mid-year performance report, which reflects the 6-month period from the 1st of April of this year to the end of September. And as a reminder, I bring an annual performance report back to authority in the early summer of each year. So although this period has experienced its seasonal challenges that we've been very accustomed to, such as typically what we experience seasonally, increased fires in the open, whether that's deliberate, agriculturally related or heathland, we have started to see the effects of extreme weather manifest on our incident demand profile, with a specific highlight of an 80% increase in outdoor fires over 3 separate heat waves. And over the period, we dealt with a totality of 11,125 incidents. So to give you an overview, although patterns of life have largely returned to pre-pandemic levels in our communities, people are out and about as usual, at work, leisure and travel. So demand has returned to what it has been before. But the long tail of COVID-19 and the debilitating effects of the pandemic, compounded by inflationary pressures on the cost of living, have affected the vulnerable within our communities and have affected our own staff well-being. You'll see within the paragraphs 4 to 14, which I'll go through in a moment, some highlights on that. But what it has also meant is the ask on us, also from our partners in specifically health, be that the wider healthcare systems in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, or our local ambulance trust, remains ever present. So going to paragraph 4 onwards, we speak about the unprecedented weather in July specifically, but June and August as well, which you may recall had major incidents declared not in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, but in many other fire and rescue authority areas across the southeast and the east of the country as well. Our critical response times did remain broadly stable in that period, and paragraph 6 talks about a small increase in our average response time, and also rural response times increasing by 18 seconds. And we'll be happy to explore through questions how that links in with the on-call availability. But what I would like to place on record is over that extreme period of the summer and the heat waves, how our on-call firefighters stepped up and enabled us to cruise specialist vehicles and to go out to those large heathland fires which were rampaging across the county. When you look at response times, we still compare favourably across the nation, and paragraph 7 as well gives those overall comparators, and paragraph 8. And again, whilst there has been an increase in the number of fires, so looking at paragraph 9, there has been a significant reduction, a positive reduction in fire-related casualties, not just in terms of the numbers, so 39% from last year, but also the categorisation of those casualties as well, with the vast majority needing just first aid on scene rather than onwards treatment at hospitals. And I mentioned in my opening about the vulnerable within our community. We have increased our safe and well home fire safety visits by 41% when we compare to the last year. We recognise and reflect on Fire Authority challenge in previous discussions on the challenges around reaching those people who don't want to be reached or are hard to, and working with our partners to overcome this, because quite simply we need to get to anyone, no matter how vulnerable they are or how little they want to engage with us. Paragraph 11 talks to the increase in sickness levels, and specifically the increase in mental health sickness. Again, I reference the long tail of COVID and the multiple factors that have contributed to that. What we are seeing is that correlates with national trends and benchmarks within our own sector and more broadly as well. And we continue to do work on staff wellbeing to understand this more and more. And then finally, with respect to the sort of core measures, the performance and health and safety, our reporting culture remains very strong with, for those of you that have a health and safety background, that all-important formula of the leading indicators, i.e. the near misses, outweighing the actual instances of health and safety incidents happening, so the lagging ones, which is positive. We are in a high risk environment, both whether that's training or when we're actually out delivering operations. So the fact that we continue to have this really strong reporting culture where we can learn from near misses is very positive. The other part of the performance report is also a snapshot of where we are with your plan, your 5-year plan. So just as a reminder on that, the safety plan is in its 3rd year. So actually, this report is 2.5 years through the 5-year cycle as well. And you'll see some headlines in paragraph 16 in terms of where we are against those improvements. As a reminder, the programme of work is that those improvements are refreshed annually through our business planning processes to ensure that what the fire service is delivering in terms of its change portfolio remains absolutely in line with the fire authority's priorities and intentions, which are set out in the overarching service plan. Well, this ensures the currency of the safety plan, I beg your pardon. And I will be bringing a report to Fire Authority as a look forward in early 2023, which details our proposals for year 4, the penultimate year. Also, there's a small paragraph in there, 17, which points to our compliance against the fire standards that have been published, against which the His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Service judges us, and members of the Fire Authority who also sit on Standards and Governance Committee will have been reported to and scrutinised that as well in September. The last report went. So in summary, the period has been very challenging. There have been macro issues outside of our sphere of control. I mentioned climate change, the economy, and the long tail of the pandemic, but absolutely there are many things within that we can improve on. And certainly as we go forward into our community risk management planning programme, so that's the programme of risk analysis that sets out proposals for your plan for 25 to 30, we'll have the opportunity to explore those further, to understand them and to consult with the public. Before I finally conclude, to take any questions addressed to myself or the wider executive group, I want to place on record thanks to Councillors Huggins and Price as the member champions for performance for their time. Both my conversations with you and wider member discussions across the Fire Authority on performance are greatly valued in terms of ensuring that we remain focused on the measures that are most impactful for the communities we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Shantha. Members, anybody want to make a comment on this paper? David?
Yes, Councillor Mounds will remember in a different building through the New Forest National Park. I spoke about the menace of these disposable barbecue units. As with Chinese lanterns, I'd very much like it if the government just banned these things. They're very often used inappropriately. And I told members of the National Park that in one day I saw 3 of these units out in the New Forest, which had just been abandoned. The problem is people like them, and because they're hot, they don't take them home with them, and they are a significant fire risk, especially with a long, hot, dry summer that we've had. Having said that, we've had quite a lot of success persuading some retailers not to stock them, and I managed to get the board members of the National Park to agree that the chief executive of the Park Authority would write to the chief fire officer to see if we could put together a letter to retailers persuading them of the wisdom of not supplying these things. And a good example might be the motorway services on the M3. A lot of people come down from London and they see all these things piled up and they think, oh, well, that's a nice idea, and they visit the forest and set light to it. So it would be very nice in terms of prevention if we could address that issue. I don't know whether the chief executive of the National Park has yet written to the chief officer, but it would be good if we could tie that one up as a risk prevention measure.
Okay, Chief.
Thank you, and thanks for your assistance with that. These are the sorts of connections that are really, really valuable to us in terms of local authority connections. I have actually received from the New Forest District Council an intention to issue a public spaces protection order relating to barbecues and wildfires. So really helpfully, that's obviously using current Police Act work. So it really looks at prohibit the following activities: placing, throwing or dropping items likely to cause a fire, lighting fires or barbecues, and using items which either cause a naked flame or pose a fire risk. So they're consulting on that right now, which obviously we're very supportive of, and so I'm grateful for your intervention and support.
Thank you, David. Keith?
Presumably that consultation will be finished before the spring of next year, because it's fine to have a consultation, but they have a habit of coming out after the event.
Tony, please.
Thank you, Shanta. Either one would want to go on record in acknowledging the dedication and the commitment that our staff showed last summer in very difficult circumstances. So thank you all. I was hiding in France in the worst of it, but I could watch it on the telly. You gave some figures for the home visits we're doing, preventative work, and it was increased on last year, but obviously the comparative figure would need to be with 2019 and before the pandemic, and I wonder if we're yet back to the 2019 levels of that.
Yeah, I can say that we're in excess of that. So we've progressively tried to build our capability across the years as we've tried to get better referral mechanisms with our partners and achieve a better success with that.
Thank you. That's really good news. I wonder if you may not be able to give me these today, but I wonder if we as a service have figures in terms of whether we're reaching all parts of our communities like that, and perhaps already thinking about some of the lessons that might come out of London about whether we were reaching all the parts of our community.
Yeah, really happy to look into that data, and perhaps we can have a conversation about how we present that data and make sure that we can fulfil the requirements across the board.
Thank you.
Derek, please.
Yeah, excellent report, really, Shanta. Thank you very much indeed. I'd just like to highlight on paragraph 11 the increase in sickness levels, which has gone up substantially, such that you're losing over 7 average shifts. Is this not having an effect on your operational performance as well in getting the guys out?
Yeah, so no problem at all. So it does create a pressure for us. So we've got good plans in place. One, to support the people that are experiencing that sickness. That's our primary, responsibility, is to support those, get them back to work. But it does put pressure on some of our teams. We have got resilience plans in place to allow us to backfill on certain locations. It does create a problem for us in our on-call staff, where we do experience quite a challenge with our on-call availability, and you'll see from the report that is quite a challenge for us. There's not an easy solution to that. Quite often it's daytime cover, and it's the experience and cover that we need during those periods that really challenge us. So any sickness or any degradation of the people that are available is very challenging for us. But I think that what I can say is that we've got plans in place. We tend to manage that very well, albeit that does put quite a bit of pressure on already strained resources out there, especially in our on-call areas.
If this is an ongoing trend, are you looking to expand your establishment to cover it then?
So I think we're always looking to work our establishment better. So from a whole time perspective is to create a better way of working on all of our stations. So for sure that is one of my primary objectives in fact this year and next year, is to look at that establishment, how we fulfill 100% availability on our whole time. On call, much more of a difficult suggestion because the commitment that we require from our current on-call ways of working is significant during the day, and and society has changed significantly. And I think that the pressure that it puts on people, especially during the day, evenings and night times, we have less of an issue, and we're able to see a better availability. We have got a project that's ongoing at the moment, so we've got some trial locations. So my thanks to Hartley Whitney, Romsey and Shanklin in particular, who are undertaking some trials to be able to test, let's say, how we work things better in our on-call sections. But certainly it's not a challenge that's just here in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. It's a national challenge, and it's something that we very much are feeding into national colleagues and trying to gain the intelligence, if you can, and experience that others that we can share with.
Okay, thank you, Stu. Thank you.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. It's a bit of a follow-on from that question from Councillor Miller. In against that performance, what's the vacancy rates at the moment in terms of whole-time and part-time?
So in terms of whole time, there are no vacancies at the moment. So we recruit into those vacancies. So we're bang on our establishment for whole time. On call is slightly more difficult to answer a question because it varies from location to location. Very much what we're seeking is the right person to fulfil the right cover at the right station. So there is no broad recruitment campaign as such. It's very much down to the local area to fulfil what the vacancy needs are in that area.
Roger.
Mine is on the availability. Now, I have to say I find the attachment very useful to read through and pick up the figures rather than from the report. It's laid out very well. So on availability, on the on-call, are you finding that with more and more people working at home now, that gives us scope to get some of those people onto on-call? Is the first question. And on the whole time, I see that we've gone from 86.9 to 93.2, and the reasoning for that is that staff weren't used on the supporting partners, and I assume that was during the driving the ambulances and what have you. Are we likely to be asked to drive ambulances if with the ambulance drivers possibly going on strike, which will have an effect upon us there?
Yeah, so if I take the first one, so working from home, during the height of the pandemic, we certainly saw an increase in our availability of on-call staff as they were working from home. What we've seen is, let's say, a return back to the challenges that we had before, where people are travelling further for work and not necessarily all at home. So that has created, the societal changes do create us a real problem during the day in particular, and that's where the requirement for our whole-time staff really comes in into its own. And certainly through the community risk programming piece of work, which is coming out, the CRMP, which is happening over the next year, that's where we'll be looking at the options around where we have our challenges with on-call in particular during those periods of challenge. So we don't see more people working from home giving us greater availability. In fact, what we see are greater challenges because people are moving and travelling further.
Kind of coming on the other part of your question, because I think it's well timed in a sense. There's two things to say. When it comes to covering our health colleagues, this service has continued to ask for volunteers to support health colleagues, and as has been described in the availability then for our services. So recognising it's degrading our services to help others, and that is a given, and they are aware of that. When it comes to potential strike action for other agencies, obviously there's a much more emotive issue for us as a service. We'll continue to ask people to volunteer should it be leading to saving lives, but clearly that's a matter for self-centred ambulance service or other health providers. We can't insist on any of this happening, so because it's outside terms and conditions of our teams, they're not required to do this. So we're very much in the hands of those individuals and what they wish to do. But should we get the request for support, obviously we'll put that to our team and see who will support and who won't. But we've been very clear all the way through this. You know, our own staff at the FB members are balloting for their own industrial action, and so it comes at a difficult time for the service to better guarantee any sort of support. But obviously we'll continue to ask, if we get asked formally, our teams whether they would support or otherwise. But just to add to Stu's point on call availability, you know, 57.6% is possibly the lowest we've seen. And I do not detract from the fact that this is a challenge across the country. In fact, the UK, some of you may have seen the government advisor in Wales recently wrote a report for government, Welsh government, really sort of decrying the kind of the real problems with on-call provision across Wales. And obviously they rely on it much more than we do, being quite a rural country. And so we are very much in the same boat, though, across England as well. So we recognise that there's something happening in society which means it's getting harder and harder. We knew this a long time ago, and we've seen it over the years get harder and harder to keep and maintain the crewing on on-call stations. Shantham and Stu have already pointed and in praise of our fantastic on-call firefighters. So I'd never be in a position of saying it can't work, because it is working in places. But we find it's a very localised solution. It relies on one or two key people making it all work. And then getting a crew around them from their local communities, and all credit to them for their leadership. There's very little strings that we can pull in terms of making that work, but we'll continue to obviously to absolutely push and keep this going. But it was something more fundamental we've got to ask ourselves in the future about how we provide fire cover across rural spaces like Hampshire, which is true across the country as well. So I'll make that statement not for any purpose other than to respond to your question about the crewing. But we also recognise that number is nowhere near where we'd like it to be. But I can assure you we're trying all sorts of different things to try and find that. I'm at Hartley tonight to try and inquire some more about how that might get improved further, really listening to our staff, because there's no magic bullet that we've ever come across nationally or indeed internationally. So yeah, that's where we are with that number.
Okay, members, any more questions on this paper? Zoe.
Just to add to that, I think as champion of performance, obviously this is driven by people and then performance. So I don't know if it's worth gathering as a people and performance champions and with the officers, because this is a national and not just sector. It is multiple sectors that experience skills deficit, long-term sick. If it continues, it will have a continued negative effect on this. And I think collectively, as people and performance, maybe we need to collectively pull together.
Thank you, Zoe. Any more? Debbie.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would just like to thank you for the 5 C's campaign, and I will actually be lifting this in its entirety and putting it in my County Councillor monthly report to go to my parish council so it can be broadcast, communicated further. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Shantha, any closing remarks?
No, thank you.
Chief?
Thank you, as ever. Thank you to the champions. Thank you for the suggestion of bringing those champions together. It's always good challenge and scrutiny to look at this report. We know that we can expect in the new year His Majesty's Inspector of Constabularies and Fire Rescue Services for their report at some point. And we want to make sure that insight adds to this insight for you, so that you get a real clear understanding about what's happening in our organisation, to make sure we can be scrutinised effectively and we can improve for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, if I can alert you to page 29 for the recommendation, which is that the 22-23 mid-year performance report be noted by the full authority. Noted? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 9, which is the budget update report on page 41 of your paperwork. And I would invite Catherine to introduce this report, please.
Good morning, members. So this is a further update following on from the October report I brought to the Fire Authority, but we're still some way away from having all the information we need for the budget setting report in February. So in terms of when we will know more, we're expecting the local government finance settlement the week commencing the 19th of December. So hopefully, from my point of view, earlier in the week rather than later would be great. And in December, we'll have, so following that update, we'll have certainty on funding, but we will still be quite reliant on assumptions about things like pay award and inflation next year. So I'll make sure I continue to work nationally with other fire service colleagues to try and get some reasonable, robust estimates for inflation. And it's just worth noting as well that we continue to use the authority's financial principles to guide our decision making, which are attached as Appendix A. So I'll just run you through some of the key highlights of this report. So in terms of budget monitoring, we're still expecting an underspend of just under £600,000 for this year, which is less than 1% against the overall budget. And in some ways, this is a really strong position given the challenges of this year. So we've got some overspends on pay costs, mainly related to additional pay inflation, but also some additional recruits and some overtime. And we've also got inflation-related overspends on energy costs and transport. And these are being offset in this position by underspends on capital financing and on us getting some additional income from our investments, as well as some additional rental income. So although this is a strong position this year, I think the point to note is that the pressures are ongoing. So the pay inflation will, whatever level is finally reached, that will be there next year and will be compounded, whereas things like the underspends on capital financing are one-off. So when we do start to borrow for our investments, then those underspends will disappear. So just to move briefly on to our efficiency measures, we are on track to deliver £800,000 of efficiency this year, which has mainly been delivered from the Operations Directorate through their sort of ongoing careful financial management approach. And for next year, we had a target of 562,000, which is the second year of this 2-year savings target we set ourselves. So again, some of that will come from within the Operations Directorate, but also we've made some savings within the premises budget through business rates, and also from just a lower local government pension service contribution rate. So we have already identified some of those savings, but we will continue to find the rest in the following financial year. And then consideration of future efficiencies will pick up as part of the medium-term financial planning and wider future service planning. So delivery pressures. So these inevitably and unfortunately, we will need to increase spending in some areas. And these delivery pressures are carefully reviewed and robustly challenged by the executive group to make sure that they're really essential. For the purposes of this report, partly because of the ongoing uncertainty about our financial position, I've split them into various different categories. So some base budget which are set out in paragraph 21. So we've got base budget increases that are essential for continued high performance next year. Then the next category being some one-off investments which are funded from existing reserves to support service priorities. And one of those is subject to a separate paper on this agenda. And so the proposal for these two types of investments is that we recommend them for inclusion in the budget subject to affordability. So at the moment we can't definitely make a firm decision because we don't have certainty about the medium-term position. And then we're also noting some additional priorities, some which are sort of relating to the current economic climate, which we will need to address in future years, and then some that are longer term where we haven't really yet quantified these, but we're flagging them to the authority as things that they're sort of our future financial challenges. And so, for example, with the additional, with our reserve contributions, in the past when inflation's been running at 1 or 2%, then those reserve contributions haven't been inflated. Now, when inflation on, for example, things like construction is very high, we'll need to think carefully about whether we inflate those reserve contributions or we accept we will be able to do less every year because the amount of money we are putting to one side will buy us less. So then to move on, there's quite a long section about our capital strategy, and this links to an exempt appendix which has got commercially sensitive information in it, which we can either go into exempt session to discuss now or we can discuss later with other exempt reports. So our approach to capital is set out in our capital investment strategy, in the authority's capital investment strategy and reserve strategy that are approved as part of the February budget setting. And in this section, we talk about some of our plans to fund expenditure from prudential borrowing. So it's just setting out that our borrowing then puts pressure on our revenue budget because of the need to repay the capital via what's known as the minimum revenue provision, and also interest on that borrowing. And part of the reason that we're drawing your attention to this at the moment is rising interest rates mean that for us to borrow the same amount of money, it will cost us more than it would have done in the past. We haven't yet actually borrowed because we're currently using the approach of internal borrowing. So that's using our cash balances we hold, which are committed to future spend, for example, on vehicles. We will use those before we go and borrow externally, due to the risk of us, firstly, it costing us more if we don't do that, and also the risk of us having too much liquid cash and that being risky. So there's a particular point I wanted to draw your attention to about an urgent decision that was made by the Chief Fire Officer around the reallocation of an underspend on the electric vehicle charging points programme to fund a pressure on the Fleet Maintenance Centre sprinkler project. And the reason this was taken was to secure a time-limited price. So if we'd waited until the authority to make this decision, then it would have cost us more because there was a fixed price available. It wasn't an increase in the overall capital programme, it was a reallocation between projects. So then just to move on to the summary sort of forecast position for next year, and as I've said, I think a lot of times recently, this is sort of more of an estimated position, and at the moment I feel like this is potentially a reasonable worst case scenario, so I'm hopeful that the position will end up being slightly better than this. So in October, table 5 in paragraph 27, we talked about having a forecast budget gap of nearly £4 million. So we've had a few changes since then, the most important two being the removal of the 1.25% health and social care levy, which was related to national insurance, and also the announcement of a council tax referendum increase from 1.99% to 3%. So for the purposes of the report, I'm assuming that council tax will be raised to the maximum level. That is obviously a fire authority decision. So the difference, a 1.99% increase would be £1.50 per annum on a Band D property, and a 3% is £2.26 per annum on a Band D property. So then we just go on to cover, if we were in this position of having a £3.3 million deficit next year, how would we manage that for next year? We would use our grant equalisation reserve, which is a reserve specifically set aside for this purpose. We wouldn't contribute to the grant equalisation reserve, and then we would make a one-off reduction to our reserve contributions to balance the position. So as set out in our financial principles, this would, particularly the reduction in our reserve contributions, would be less than ideal because it would mean we had less money in the future to invest in our estates, vehicles, IT and equipment. But this would allow us to close the budget gap for next year. So in terms of managing our sort of short to medium term risks to our financial position, we're in a strong position. So there are various recommendations at the end of the report, but I'm very happy. Oh, and in addition, there is also a Treasury Management Appendix that provides sort of a useful high-level economic update, and also talks about our Treasury Management activities and for the first 6 months of the year, and shows that we have complied with our Treasury Management strategy. So I'm very happy to take questions.
Roger, please.
Thank you. I'm not sure if that's going to be to Catherine or to Stu, this question. On efficiency measures, paragraphs 27 and 28. 27 says efficiency measures of 800,000 on delivering in 22-23, and then it goes on to another 562,000 in 23-24. Now, that is on the operations directorate, which is Stu's, which is obviously front line. I'd like to know what that £1.3 million is being saved, or how is it being saved in frontline services? Because that is the important part to me, where one of the most important things is we've got staff and appliances available to turn up when necessary. And that worries me when I see 1.3 million being taken out of that.
So I can give you the assurance that that doesn't equate to less firefighters, less fire engines available. What it does equate to is us using our staff in a better and more smart way. And a lot of this is back to a few years ago when we really started to count the pennies. So we started to scrutinise the budgets really hard to make decisions based on good financial management and make sure that all of our managers, right the way down to fire stations, were aware of and could see the budgets and how much things cost and make decisions based on how much things cost. Because what we were trying to do was, I coined the phrase that the chief used at the time, was tighten our belt. So this isn't about taking slices out of frontline provision. This is about doing that same frontline provision better and making better decisions, but doing it locally so that that's where the money is being saved. So it's through arguably what you could call efficiencies. It's doing the same for less.
So can I just follow that up? I'd like to know such as, because
I can give you a really tangible example.
Yeah, yes, please.
So if sickness was raised earlier on as being a potential challenge for us and an issue for us, and we've seen an increase in our long-term sickness cases. Our standard approach used to be that if we had someone off sick for more than 28 days, they were long-term sick, and we would backfill them with a fixed-term contract for the period of time that they're off sick. So, for example, we would see firefighters injure a knee, have a knee operation, be off for 6 months with recuperation, and then come back. For that period of time, we would bring in an additional member of staff to cover 6 months. Now, of course, that additional member of staff brings with them their own sickness, holiday, courses and training. And so what we stopped doing was backfilling for a 6-month period where we would have been experiencing those people not there on those shifts, and we backfilled them with individual shifts where they were needed, so that what we weren't doing was overpaying, if you like, on the staff budget, where we would effectively be bringing someone to work to have a day off. So we were saving that money, and that's the provision that's been built into the budget previously, which we're removing through careful management on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably a question for Matt rather than yourself, Catherine, but the EV charging project had an underspend of £160,000 and it was diverted to other areas. I can't remember, what was the contingency within that budget?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember what the contingency was set, but there was a contingency set, yeah.
Therefore, my supplementary is, if you're going to have a contingency that you don't use and then you go and divert it elsewhere, is that playing shops? Because you took money that you didn't need and then used it elsewhere.
So I don't think it's playing shops. I mean, the Fleet Maintenance Centre sprinkler project has been quite challenging because of the time it's happened in, and we have robustly challenged whether it absolutely is a service priority, and for business continuity reasons, it really is. So I think the overall capital programme level hasn't changed because one project was delivered within budget. The contingency on the Fleet Maintenance Centre project was exhausted because it was relatively small, and it's been a challenging project subject to a great deal of inflation. So I don't think we're playing shops. I think we're just reallocating resources to where less resource was needed on one project and more resource was needed on another. We've just reallocated. Normally, we would bring that back to the Fire Authority as a capital programme update to be very clear that there was less money needed here and more here. But because of the time critical nature of us needing to sign that contract, we did follow our governance and make an urgent decision. So does that answer your question?
I don't want to go off on a tangent, and I'm really cautious about this, but we've just done the 21-22 accounts, of which £2.5 million went into reserves from the revenue budget. Well, £2.5 million is 5% of the precept. Approximately £550,000, 1%. Yet, we put the precepts up for 21-22 by 7%, and you took 5% of that and put it into reserves because you never used it. So how can we have assurance that that £2.5 million could have gone into next year's budget as part of the grant equalisation reserve to balance it out better, to reduce the precept demands on our residents?
So that £2.5 million underspend that went to the capital payments reserve, it is needed to support the capital programme. So it's not money that's just in there for a rainy day, if you see what I mean. Also, the precept, so if we hadn't increased the precept this year, we would now have a £2 million overspend. So in theory, we could have scaled back the capital programme, used that money to balance the budget this year, but then next year, we would have an even larger gap because we'd have all the effect unfunded of this year's inflation, and then we'd have to catch up again next year. So local authorities, that particularly some fire authorities that have done that, where they haven't increased council tax on the basis that it wasn't necessary, and I do think it was needed in this year, but the basis you could use reserves to balance things out, you store yourself up a significant problem for the future when your reserve balance is exhausted and then you have a major funding gap. So I suppose it's two parts. Firstly, that it's the long-term impact of doing that, but also the fact that that £2.5 million went to the capital payments reserve and it is needed for future investments.
If I may, I'm going to pause because I think this is going to be part. This could be part of the budget discussion next year, because and certainly the reserve strategy. Because I'm a taxpayer, a council taxpayer, and I have no option. I have no issue about giving money for the local authorities in order to do their business. But when I hear then the £2.5 million is then siphoned off as an underspend going elsewhere, it may be funding capital projects. But equally, if you have a demand for capital projects, come and get capital funding for those projects.
Not at all. It's a useful provocation, arguably. But I just want to remind members, particularly the Vice Chair, about your financial principles, which, as the Treasurer has actually alluded to earlier, these are planning over the long term. So yes, we could have done it the way you described, but quite rightly, the Treasurer's duty is to deliver your financial principles. So if you want to amend those financial principles in next year's conversations, more than happy to. The same as your reserve strategy. You've set that reserve strategy, which we have to deliver against. So that is what the reserve is for. And our long-term planning, so the way we've done this term, is about the long-term thinking rather than the short-term settling of the council tax. Appreciate that. That's a gift you have. So we're more than happy to have the conversation next year. What I'd say is phrases like siphoning off, potentially are pejorative in the sense of what we're trying to do as professional officers, is serve your strategies. But I do take the point you're making. It's a useful provocation. We've got to make sure we have that conversation at the right time.
Chairman, I'll try to be slightly less provocative. As I understood it, Catherine, you referred to putting off a decision on some capital investments on the basis that at a later date we'll have a better understanding of where we are financially. Is that so?
So no, I think it was more to do with the timing of when we borrow. So the timing of when to borrow is always quite a difficult decision, and particularly now with current interest rate environment, you don't want to make a decision in the short term which you live to regret in the future. But so the discussion is really about working with our Treasury advisors and looking at the spread of our capital programme, so we make sure that we borrow at the opportune time for the long term for the authority, rather than either borrowing too early, which may mean that then we have a large amount of money that in effect isn't needed. And I suppose the analogy is you wouldn't get a mortgage for a house that you hadn't yet bought, because then if you had to pay your mortgage for several years when you hadn't got the asset, that would be a poor decision. But equally then, you wouldn't want to move into a house and then live in it for a couple of years and then worry about how you're going to pay for it in the future. So it's that timing. The fact currently that we have relatively high cash reserves which are committed. So we are committed to a vehicle programme, and those vehicles are now being delivered, but it's striking the balance of when do we do the borrowing, so we make sure that we don't borrow too soon and we borrow at the most advantageous rates, and that's what we're working closely with our Treasury advisors on.
Okay, I'm enjoying the complexity of this. I think that there is a sort of a risk assessment to be done on all these decisions, aren't there? Because if you sign a contract fairly early on, you have some certainty about the price. Whereas if you delay something for 6 months or a year, it may be hugely much more expensive.
Yes, and inflation and interest rate risks, as well as our long-term funding, are items listed on our corporate risk register, and we're very, very aware of them, working particularly closely with Matt to make sure that we understand the risks and the advantages of doing things when we're doing them. So, for example, taking this time-limited option for the Fleet Maintenance Centre meant that we protected ourselves from having to re-tender and potentially face a significantly higher cost.
Derek, please.
Yeah, if I may just move away from the capital revenue budget situation we've talked about several months. Just go back to Stu's comment about the on-call firefighters. You're showing a forecast reduction of 261,000 in the cost of the on-call firefighters, Stu. This seemed a little inconsistent with the previous answer. I'm sure it's not inconsistent, but it seemed a little inconsistent with the previous responses on
So
staffing.
So this is about getting the right people in the right place. So it's more difficult to, we can't just recruit anyone from across the area or indeed the region. We need to get them within that local 4-minute turn-in time at the time when we need them. So it may well be that we can access someone who wants to become a firefighter but can provide us with nighttime cover, and it's actually daytime cover that we're lacking. And so therefore we would have a vacancy that we wouldn't be able to fill, even though we would have a candidate that could potentially be a firefighter, but they wouldn't actually give us any performance provision. And I think that's the dilemma that we have, is trying to get the right people in the right location, but specifically at the right time to give us the performance.
So a station that is entirely dependent on on-call effectively could be not required. Is that correct?
So if you take Tadley as a great example that you spoke earlier of, and Tadley are a very good station, very well available. If they were struggling during the day for cover, and their availability was during the day, but they had only candidates that could work at night, for example, because they worked out of the area during the day, we would have vacancies on that station that we couldn't fill, because there would be no point in us filling to have a number of people at night available, let's say 8 when we only needed 4, yet we wouldn't have any during the day. So that's why there's this challenge between the overall numbers of on-call, if we look at that as a complete for the county, compared to when you drill down into the individual stations, it's much more complex.
Okay, thank you. And finally, just one final comment. I think, Catherine, you made a kind of presumption as to what you can expect council tax. Is it going to go up now that we're allowed to put it up, or whatever? What exactly are you working on?
So we in the past have tended to assume that council tax will increase by the maximum level, but obviously that is a decision for the fire authority, and when we come to discuss council tax increases, we can set out the effects of next year and in future years of raising council tax by different levels. So for the purposes of this report, I've assumed that council tax previously we assumed it would rise to the maximum level of 1.99%, the £1.50. So for the purposes of putting some figures into the report, I've assumed it would go to 3%, which is the £2.25 for Band D properties. The government's assumption, and their assumption of our funding, is always based on the fact that we will increase council tax by the maximum amount. But that doesn't mean that's what we have to do. But in terms of understanding our funding position, that's seems to be the safest assumption, but obviously we can set out the different options and the effects those would have in the short and medium term. Can I just really briefly come back to the on-call firefighter point as well? In terms of budgeting for the costs of a member of staff or a whole-time firefighter, it's quite straightforward because they get paid sort of a standard amount of money and then extra for some allowances and overtime. But on-call firefighters' pay is very variable depending on, for example, the stage they are in their career. So when they have to do some initial training, then they obviously have to do a lot of hours, and so those are all need to be paid for. And equally, when it's very busy, they do a lot more. So I would always expect the on-call budget to be harder to set and slightly less predictable. So I'd expect there to be some variance just because of the immense complexity of on-call firefighters' pay. So I don't think we will necessarily ever get to a point where it's exactly right. So a variance to the budget is more expected.
Roger.
Can I just come back to this point about council tax? Now, I think we're going to have a very serious debate about the council tax increase or not, because I think that from the service, yes, we want it, but unfortunately, the government is trying to force the local authorities in putting up council tax where people can't afford it on an unfair system which is based on where they live rather than their ability to pay. And it's a change of government strategy, and I think we've got to start resisting that and sort of saying to them, it's up to you to give us the money, as they've stopped giving us the grants they were, and give us the grants we need to provide the services. You're insisting we provide these services, but they're forcing us to take more money off of the local people, and local people haven't got the money these days. And whereas if you pay it into central government, you're paying it basically on a tax basis, which is an ability to pay, and that seems the fairest way to me. So I just get very, angry that we're trying to force people to pay more, but the service needs it, and we're going to be in a very vexed situation against the service in need and against the people's ability to pay, where it's going to be very difficult.
Okay, Roger, point taken, thank you. Derek, Keith? Catherine.
So to echo that really, that this would be a proposal for bridging a budget gap next year. We would then need to work out what £1.5 million worth of capital expenditure will we not do, and then that next year we would then work out how to bridge that budget gap. So it's definitely only a one-off. We can't make the decision to say we'll take money out of capital every year and hope everything will be okay. So that's definitely not the approach. So this would be a one-year activity to mean that because of the fact we don't hear about the settlement until December, trying to close a budget gap between December and March would be I think, very difficult and would likely not allow us the time to make proper decisions. This would be a 1 year time, and then we would need to reinstate those capital contributions or make a conscious decision to scale down the capital programme, but they would have to be informed decisions, not sort of just thinking it will work out, because that's not providing us with medium-term financial stability. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's fine. And I'm glad you made that point, because this is the sort of issue that that have sunk a lot of councils across the country. They've simply used the money they've got in a reserve somewhere for a capital programme or whatever it is, and that's bridged the gap. And then they hope next year they get a bit more money from the government. When it doesn't happen, they look at very clever ways of investing money, which turns out not to be quite as clever as they thought it was, and it just gets steadily worse. So I'm very pleased you said that's a one-off. I certainly wouldn't want it to happen next year.
Chief.
Thank you. And to capture some of those summary points, actually, so believe it or not, there was a plan here, actually, in terms of the cycle. So you're, and Shantha mentioned it earlier, but the opportunity you have as an authority will have an opportunity to put to you some of the difficult choices you'll face, including council tax. But the community risk management plan is the publicly consulted where we're going next. There's certain things I can't do under my operational discretion in terms of my delegated powers. Has to be for fire authority, it has to be by a public consultation, which will be difficult and challenging for you to consider if the continued financial situation exists, because we'll have to reduce our revenue spend to bring us in line. We'll have to consider capital programme in the future if the trajectory continues. So what Catherine is very helpfully doing is buying us time so that we can get into the planning cycle as it exists, the 5-year plan you have. And if I have to do it earlier, I have to do it earlier. But at the moment, it looks like we can do it in that time frame which is laid out. And we'll be bringing that process through properly researched and evidence base for you to make some difficult decisions from, so that it withstands public scrutiny and public consultation, so you'll be well informed in decisions you make. So absolutely aligned with the financial issues. Also, your decisions about the future provision of our service to your community are aligned with that very clearly.
Thank you, Chief. Any more? Derek.
Just a final one. Just confirm, please, Catherine. We are looking at 3.3% as the inflation factor, as per the Arling Close Treasury report. Is that right?
So we get regular updates from Arling Close. This will only ever be a snapshot in time, and I think even Arling Close would acknowledge that normally where their forecasts have been very reliable, it's just very difficult to forecast inflation at the moment. So we are regularly meeting with them and keeping a close eye, and we've got a range that of affordability that we're looking at. So normally I would say their forecast is normally bang on, but I think at the moment it's just very difficult to predict.
Okay, well, I think we're in the same boat in the county.
Okay, any more? Any further questions? Catherine, happy closing remark?
Yeah, I think it's just worth, it's been really helpful discussion, and I think it's just worth us, just wanting to be really clear and reiterate that any money we put into the capital payments reserve is then spent on the capital programme, which is a fire authority decision. So other than this one urgent decision we've made, we as officers don't have the authority to set or vary the capital programme. So the money going into the reserve doesn't then give officers the ability to decide where that money will be spent, because the capital reserves are an authority decision. So I think I just wanted to reiterate that point. But
Okay.
no, thanks very much.
Good, thank you. Thank you. Chief? So, members, if I can alert you to the recommendation on page 54, of which there are 6, that the budget monitoring possession be noted by this full authority. Agree? That the category A and B delivery pressures set out in Appendix B be approved by this full authority for inclusion in the 22-23 budget, subject to affordability. That the category C and D delivery pressures set out in Appendix B be noted by this full authority. That the amendment to the capital programme made by the Chief Fire Officer under paragraph B17 of the financial regulations be noted by this full authority. That the mid-year review of Treasury management activities set out in Appendix C be approved by this full authority. And lastly, that the changes to the capital programme set out in exempt Appendix D be approved by this full authority. Amen. Thank you. Okay, so if we can move to item 10, which is embedding national guidance in operational response, which is page 75 of your paperwork, and it is Chancellor again.
Thank you, Chairman. So, following on from the previous report, where this paper is referenced as a one-off investment in Appendix B, I would like to introduce this report, which proposes a new commitment from the Fire Authority for the service to fully embed updated, approved codes of practice, so in this particular example, national operational guidance, in our policy, plans and procedures. The report sets out quite clearly the safety critical nature for the public and our firefighters to have operational procedures which are developed in accordance with a thorough risk assessment against an improved code of practice. And members will recall, possibly at the May Authority Policy Advisory Group, where I spoke about how we develop operational procedures or update existing ones. And I used the case study of the fires in tall buildings, which is an example of national guidance in practice. And members of the Standards and Governance Committee will recall at the September committee meeting my report on the service's approach to full compliance with published fire standards and signposting for the need for additional resource required to execute aspects of this work. So this report, embedding national guidance in operational response, sets out the criticality of having that guidance embedded within our practice and fully describes the benefit for our communities and for our firefighters, as well as illustrating the backdrop of increased forensic scrutiny that the fire sector is under, the increased public inquiries and the specific public inquiries of the Grenfell Tower fire and the Manchester Arena incident, illustrating that fully. So, whilst the report itself is an ask of £750,000 over 2 years to enable a team of 7 to execute this work, it's far more than that at its core. And it will give the Fire Authority the ability to demonstrate how it will demand the very best in terms of policy, practice and tactics for the Fire and Rescue Service to develop within its means. Before I take any specific questions, I just want to draw your attention to some specific points of detail. So why now? Well, we've come a long way to fully align ourselves with national operational guidance, and it's something that's been within our service for time. But after considering progress, the executive group determined we needed a dedicated team to progress this work to full alignment. And whilst we're required to align ourselves with tactical NOG and national operational guidance and strategic actions through the fire standard on operational preparedness, this proposal will enable us to meet it. So you're probably thinking, well, if this is something that was published some time ago, why are we not aligned to it already? So the National Operational Guidance spectrum is very broad and it covers every single aspect of operational response. As I'm sure you'll appreciate, it's something that we can't do overnight, and we have been progressing over time, and certainly looking forward, we're bringing forward the areas of most risk. We've already invested considerable time and effort to align ourselves. But what should also be noted and highlighted rather, it was only the publication of that fire standard and operational preparedness which saw fire services mandated to align themselves. Before that point in time, it was only considered guidance. In terms of where we are against, or in comparison rather, to other fire and rescue services, it's a very mixed picture. Until you're inspected, as fire and rescue services inspected or subject to a public inquiry, there's no clear validation criteria to demonstrate compliance to national operational guidance that's publicly available. But what we are doing and have been doing in terms of preparing this report to come to Fire Authority is looking across our network fire control partnerships, so Devon and Somerset, Dorset and Wiltshire, and also other similar fire and rescue services within the family group, such as Kent, to see how they're doing it and how they're doing it in the most efficient way to mirror that. And of course, supporting this proposal will ensure that we won't fall behind our family group. So in terms of the prioritisation of the work programme, as I briefly mentioned, the programme looking forward is based on areas with the largest degree of the largest gaps and the level of risk to the organisation. We'll continue to keep this under review, and the way we've designed the execution of the programme will mean that we're able to flex that during the project, should we need to bring a specific one forward. I'd also like to suggest as well that happy to update members at future authority policy advice groups or awareness sessions on the progress of national guidance being embedded within our service, if that's of use. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I just don't quite understand. In paragraph 21, these people, this team of 7, I mean, are they coming from existing staff, or are they going to be enrolled newly, or what? I mean, if they're existing staff, surely they're on the payroll already.
So there are 2 specific technical roles. So the developers, where it says 2 grade F developers, which we would be openly recruiting. We've specifically designed the team where you've got that blend of operational staff, i.e. Greybook staff and Green Book. In terms of the Greybook staff, so the station manager, etc., they will be people who are within this organisation, but of course by embedding them within this work, it takes them away, because this is new work, but it takes them away from something they're already done. So whilst they're not new people, then what it will require is, for example, with a station manager, if that's a station manager fair, and for example, we will need to put a station manager in there to obviously maintain that operational response. So what I will say, and sort of preempting a potential question, but is that we could have some temporary appointments and chains because of acting ups, or it could be sideways moves. But I'm sure as the Fire Authority will recall that whereas the service some years ago was in a position where there were lots of temporary chains, we've worked really hard to reduce that. And this is an example of where we need to have a temporary contract. So when I say a temporary contract, that's if you track that all the way down, if every single person in that chain was acting up, to maintain a degree of agility and flexibility.
Okay, thank you. Members? Roger?
From my point of view, I think it's something which we've got to do, because if we don't do it, when we are inspected, inspectors will be looking that we're complying with all the national laid down criteria, and if we're not, we should be heavily criticised. So we really have no option, but we need to do it, so I fully support it.
Okay, thank you. David?
Yes, Roger has said exactly what I was going to say.
Well, don't say it again then. Debbie? Oh, were you, sorry? No? Keith?
Yeah, it's guidance, isn't it? It's not mandatory as such, although it's pretty close to it. I suppose my first point would be that these sorts of amounts of guidance and instructions we get, that's an ongoing process. You're going to get them all the time. So presumably there are individuals within the organisation whose job is to do precisely that, keep up with the change in regulations. So my question really is, why is this that much different to the sorts of things that are going on all the time? The second point I'd make is, if you are going to ask for a specific sum of money, I would argue that it should include any pay awards, so we know exactly where we stand in terms of the funding necessary. And the last point I'd make is, in this difficult recruitment environment we now live in, are we going to be able to get the people we need?
I'll take as many of those as I can, and I'll look to the Chief to fill in any gaps for me. So I think I'll start with the easiest, which is, yes, I'm confident we can get the people that we need for the team. In terms of then absolutely what you say about it was guidance, a bit with the, just reminding you again, with the publication of the operational preparedness standard, it would be a brave Fire Authority that would sort of knowingly go against any specific guidance come the day of the public inquiry. That said, Obviously, everything we do, and you'll note within the fire standards where we do our own assurance, is we take a sort of cost-benefit approach in terms of compliance or not. And I think that was it, and I'll look to the Chief to fill in any gaps I've left.
Yeah, I think the phrase, NOG, for started operational guidance, probably sounds a bit lighter than it actually is, and I think you've alluded to the fact that it's as nearest statute as you can get. The problem is because it's such a high-risk environment, if I wasn't to follow an approved code of practice and found some other wacky way of doing it, then my defence is somewhat weakened if something were to go wrong, and I'd want to make sure our firefighters have the very best protection. And so this suite of products that have been developed nationally should, in time, reduce the need for us to create our own in the future. So there will be a longer term, we hope, reduction in costs actually to services, but like we've got best laid plans, so that we don't have to keep reinventing our own procedures because they've been once nationally done. All we need to do is adopt them as they come through. And there's now a system linked with this, which is the National Operational Learning, which says this has happened somewhere in part of the country, and this is the experience they've had. We should change our procedure to accommodate that. That's done once at the centre for all of us. So we all then adjust our procedures according to that bit of learning. Historically, it would have been done locally. We had our own tragedies here in Hampshire, and we learnt a lot, and we wrote to all the other fire chiefs saying, don't forget about this. This system, if you like, replaces all that. So NOG is just very one part of it, but it's huge, and it's very much a different way of teaching our staff to tactically make decisions. So it's broken down to lots of different pieces. So rather than, and probably the best example I've heard of this was during a public inquiry, the Commissioner of London talked about the Grenfell Tower fire, where she said, I can't plan for an aircraft landing on the Shard. That was a rather famous thing she said. Well, actually what this process does, it allows firefighters to break that scenario down. You know how to deal with incidents in high-rise buildings, you know how to deal with aircraft, you know how to deal with mass evacuation. Those three things are within NOG, and so firefighters can use those three bits of information and skills and knowledge they have to apply to every given scenario. So you don't have to know how to deal with an aircraft landing on a Shard, you need to know how to deal with all those different constituent parts. It's quite a different way of doing things. We are largely there as an organisation, we do it more like that than most others, but there's still a way to go in terms of sprinting to get this delivered. Once delivered, we'll very much be in the maintenance of that, and that will be business as usual funding for our sort of revenue budgets. So really this is about getting us to the right space over the next 2 years, because you can almost guarantee that His Majesty's Inspectorate will say we're not going fast enough, and that will almost be certainly in our report as is in everyone else's report this year. So they're saying get on with it, make it faster. So it is quite timely that we draw this paper to your attention.
Yeah, I understand all that, and I'm not against this. The sort of thing that really worries me, though, is you get a national body producing guidance, so that lets them off the hook when someone comes back to them and says that's going to cost a lot of money. But then you get your regulatory authority saying actually you haven't followed the guidance. And at the end of the day, when these national statements are made, the bottom line is the people in Hampshire or wherever it is have to pay for it. And I often feel that when this sort of guidance is produced in the first place, that some indication of what it's going to cost should be part of that guidance, together with the fact that the people that are inspecting us understand that as well. Otherwise, it's all pushed further down the line. I've seen this so often with the county council, where you get people making decisions centrally that sound a very good idea, but the cost of implementing them is someone else's responsibility, either the county or the district or the fire authority. So I just think we just have to be a bit careful of that. And if we are able to, when we're inspected or when we have discussions with the people producing these sorts of reports, we need to go back and say, this is going to cost money. This is going to cost taxpayers' money in Hampshire. Do you realise that? Is it worth it? And let us know what you think is reasonable. You start making, and then you actually get back down to the people writing the document in the first place. So they might just hesitate once or twice before inflicting on us something that's going to be very expensive and may not, in the final analysis, be absolutely necessary. Sorry, that was a bit of a speech, but
So I better state an irony and disclose an interest here, because what they tend to do, the National Fire Chiefs Council is responsible for drafting the standards, and they're agreed at an independent standards board. So yeah, I led 3 particular standards that have been written. Not this one, I would say, not NOG, but so they do tend to use us. So we are, the phrase about hoisted our own petard comes to mind, but there's something about us. It does cost money, and we're absolutely clear that the standards should be almost a de minimis position. If there are national standards on something, it should be absolutely critical that everyone complies, like safeguarding, that's what I was responsible for, and prevention. But operational standards, or a way of doing operational guidance, is very much what this is talking about. We are much closer than many other services to the way of doing this, but what this will do is hopefully standardise the way of doing things, which you've seen across the country has provided all sorts of difficulties with operational disasters.
Tony.
Thank you for your report. I echo a lot of the comments here that I get this and I support it. Having managed in public sector, there's often these wonderful secondment and acting up and acting in opportunities, but they in their own way then can create a long chain of somebody acting into one process, into another, that causes its own operational challenges.
It is a risk in terms of when you undertake a new piece of work, then you are using your existing workforce, and so either you have to bring new people in, or you have to accept that somewhere else something has to go. And I'm really clear that this is in addition to all of the other important stuff we're doing. So I'm not advocating that the Fire Authority approve this at the expense of something else. I do think where we've gone where we've come from as an organisation is we've got much more of a grip, and I will use that phrase, on temporary chains. In fact, it is, from my memory, something that the Inspectorate requests data on us from us in their sort of biannual data returns. So we can't hide anywhere on that. But I suppose within, when you mentioned at the start of the session on spending a couple of hours in fire control, and that would be an example of where a location, as in some of our fire stations, other teams, where we do have people on temporary contracts, whether that's, for example, on-call people working in a whole-time station, or we're bringing someone in from outside the organisation on a temporary contract. And we do that very, very carefully. But I suppose in order for us to maintain that agility as an organisation, we can't bring every single person in as a permanent employee. And the other point that Stu's helpfully just asked me to raise, or to point to, is, of course, looking at it really positively. When you have these opportunities, it gives your succession planning, your pipeline, and your opportunity for growth and development for individuals as well.
David.
Yeah, Chairman, I can think of some examples where firefighters from Hampshire have gone out internationally. I think of one example in I think we sent a firefighter on secondment to California for a few weeks, and the idea is that they would learn about their practices and procedures, and there might well be some really golden nuggets of good practice that we could adopt in Hampshire. And I wonder to what extent us taking on sort of national guidance and everybody doing the same would inhibit us learning lessons in quite the same way and rolling them out in a practical way.
Thank you. That's a really helpful question, because as I said earlier, we are partly to blame for our own the challenges here. So Stu, for example, is the national NFCC leader on maritime firefighting. So it's a great example where you'd expect Stu to be whizzing off around the world, he'd like to, looking at some of the best practices around maritime firefighting, so that the NOG, the National Operational Guidance around maritime firefighting, would be the very best. And certainly when it comes to places like Australia and America, we already do share nationally those, and it's much easier to share rather than Merseyside, Hampshire, or someone else doing it. So we might find we are asked to go out to somewhere to look at what they're doing, and we can bring that back not only to this service but to the NFCC, so that the guidance can be updated and listened to. Certainly the Australian Fire and Rescue Services they do share a lot both ways with us, as do the Americans. So we're quite good at doing that international sharing about best practice.
Members, any more? Yep.
From my own education, Shantha, what is the difference between fire standards and the NOG? Does NOG take primacy? Are they complementary? Are they in conflict with one another? What is the relationship between them?
Great question. So fire standards, of which there are now 12 that have been published, and there's, as you know, an ongoing programme to bring more into a full suite, are what the inspectorate will judge us against. So the aim of that is that, whereas in round one of the inspection, so 2018-19, it was very difficult for the inspectorate to make a judgment on the sector in terms of comparisons. It enables that even playing field. I mean, obviously there's still the locality differences, etc., and different sort of local challenges. So that's that. And then the National Operational Guidance informs a number of the fire standards. So off the top, I mentioned a couple of times the operational preparedness. There's a couple of others that relate to that. So what the fire standards will say is you need to comply with national guidance in these particular areas. Again, I'd be happy to do an awareness session at a later stage or specific conversations, but there's a website, ukfrs.com, which has just got an incredible amount of the national operational guidance, so members can see for yourselves what it actually comprises. But I suppose the fire standards is ultimately what the sort of measure at which we're judged against, but there'll be a reference in that to comply with national operational guidance. So that's, if you like, quite a sweeping statement, because it then presupposes that the fire authority is ensuring that the fire and rescue service has all of that compliance in place.
Briefly, so if I've cut it right, NOG has the primacy over the fire standards because the fire standards should be constructed to comply with the NOG?
No, if you like, it's the other way around. The fire standards have the primacy. The NOG informs it, because the NOG is the fire standards, and we'd happily walk you through, but is a set, one standard for, say, operational preparedness will be, 2 or 3 sort of sides of A4. It will be a set of high-level statements. It's almost the musts, the shoulds, the coulds, if you like. And then there'll be statements in there like, must comply with national operational guidance strategic actions. But then there is like a whole plethora of national operational guidance, again, mandating what good looks like in terms of, to use the example the Chief Fire Officer used earlier, of being able to deal with an aircraft on a high building. So it's the meat and the technical stuff which forms specific standards, but the standards which trump that are high-level statements.
If I can just add as well, because as Shantha was filling the gap beautifully, I was just quickly looking up the standards. So the fire standard for operational preparedness says to achieve this fire standard, the fire and rescue service must, and it says develop and embed operational policies, procedures, taking into account the national operational guidance, unless it can demonstrate there's other ways of achieving the same outcome, something like that. So it's subservient to the fire standard, and the fire standards are something you must comply with.
I'm not going to be around. It just says it must comply with the NOG, therefore NOG must have primacy over the standard. Is in my similar understanding of English.
Yeah.
I'll take it at your word.
Twin say describe primacy, I guess.
Always happening.
Shantha, any closing remark? No? Chief? Members, if I draw your attention to page 81, where the recommendation is, which is that the approach outlined in this paper, namely that the service fully aligns itself with the NOG, National Operation Guidance, and that up to £750,000 from the Transformation Reserve be provided for this work, be approved by this full authority. Approved? Okay. Look, I have been neglecting all your comforts. Do you want a short break? Well, I don't care if you do, I do. So let's break for 10 minutes. Sparks, if you could turn us off. So back here at 1:45. Is that all right? Welcome back. Moving on to item 11, which is the carbon reduction pathway update, to be found on page 85 of your notes. And I would invite Matt Robertson to hit us with this.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon now, members. So this report has two purposes. The first is to provide a overall update on the activities that have been taken since the back end of last year when we came to the Fire Authority on this particular item, and also to then propose the next steps, the next phase of our journey to achieving the authority's aim of being net zero by 2050. So the report seeks approval to invest in our estate to start to reduce the impact the estate's having on our carbon. I'll come to that more in a moment, but is seeking a medium position of an annual investment over a period of the next 5 years to start that process and help us achieve the target for the estate by 2030, which is the first milestone on the programme. So just on page 86 of your packs, paragraph 6, the where are we now? So in terms of an update, what we have achieved so far, since 2019-20, when our first profile was done, we have now reduced our carbon footprint by 11%. So there are the figures in tonnes of CO2, if that's of interest, throughout the document, but I'll use the percentages to keep it easier to follow for now. So that's clearly a positive. That's been undertaken through a combination of different things, including zoning buildings, but also the use of improvement works on the Isle of Wight. So obviously the investment the authority has made over the last couple of years on improving facilities on the island has subsequently reduced carbon footprint since 1920's baseline, which included those buildings. The electric vehicle charging points, which the authority provided funding for, and we briefly spoke about earlier in this meeting, are now rolled out. So those provide 110, 125 actually, but 110 sort of large charging facilities across the county. And the vehicle replacement programme is now prioritising electric and hybrid vehicles for all light vehicles, so car or vans. We have 28 electric and hybrid vehicles on order. They should be in service already, but there's delays, as you're probably aware, globally on new car deliveries, which has very much moved that to the right. But they are still, the manufacturers are still telling us all 28 should be in place by March next year. But obviously we'll watch that and how things unfold with the supply of those vehicles. Equally, since we last spoke about this, the condition reports of our built estate have now been fully completed, so the authority also granted funding to commission that specialist piece of work. And from these surveys, we've been able to assess properly the investment needed and the investment items, if you like, that are listed later on in the report to reduce the carbon impact of our buildings. So in terms of, that's kind of where we are. In terms of next phase, as a reminder, the estate contributes roughly 60% of our carbon footprint, with vehicles contributing the other sort of 40. So it's clearly paramount to continue the sustained investment in our buildings if we're going to achieve the authority's net zero ambition. So in paragraph 12, there's a summary of the proposed recommendation, which is option 2, the 3 key sort of groupings of priority investment that we would use money for. One is finishing the installation of LED lighting across the estate. We do have LED lighting already across a lot of our buildings, but it is not everywhere due to the way buildings are used, and therefore the return on investment on LED lighting has not been prioritised over other things. Equally, solar PV, so in continuing rollout of solar PV, but interestingly, having battery systems on the solar PV, which allowed us to store the electricity that generates and reuse it ourselves, rather than defaultingly sending energy back to the national grid and then calling off the national grid. So obviously that's very useful in terms of the current market and the unit cost of electricity, where we will actually be generating our own electricity, rather than historically, which has never really worked out because electricity units have been a lot cheaper. You're better off selling it to the grid and then buying it back, basically. Now, that's kind of very much not the case. So having the battery storage helps. Equally, the battery storage improves our resilience of our buildings by allowing buildings to almost operate off-grid, if you like. They're not off-grid, but in effect off-grid for a period of time by having power stored on site. And then the paragraph 12C there, improve heating controls and zoning on appliance bays and on main station buildings, and reducing temperature controlling across different parts of the building. Our buildings are very old, so they're roughly in the sort of late 50s for buildings on average, and therefore they have unique heating systems, which I'll put in a way to describe it. So they need sort of very carefully managed and zoned, so this will help with that. Alongside that, we obviously still have revenue money, which is used in revenue budgets, which are used to maintain and improve building fabric every year. So paragraph 13 just provides assurance that we will continue to invest in buildings irrespective of the decision made today, and that will be prioritised around insulating, double glazing where that feels appropriate, and the appliance bay doors, which have been continued programmes for the last 5 or 6 years, but we only have funding really to do, for example, 1 bifold door a year. So it sort of slowly tricks away, which obviously would take a while to get through all 62 of the sites, though many now clearly have new doors. In terms of collaborating, so page 89 now, we do all of this not in isolation, and part of the reason why we were able to secure an underspend on the electric vehicle charging programme was because of opportunities to collaborate and bulk purchase and work with other partners. So we will continue to do that with the Constabulary, the Office of the Police and Crown Commissioner and the County Council, and we do utilise energy initiatives and grant funding as well where possible. On top of that, paragraph 21, there is national collaboration, which Hampshire and the Isle of Wight are absolutely in the centre of. So we're a member of an NFCC group, which looks at the climate and sustainability and environmental impact of the sector as a whole. And that group has produced a national sustainability charter, which is at Appendix B. Everything in that charter is actually already within our either our asset management policy, which the authority approved earlier in the year, or it's already within our sustainability procedures. So there's nothing new there, but it is a public declaration of the journey we are heading in and the common goal and the ambition we have around net zero. So the recommendation is that we will formally agree to that charter. So just scrolling down to page 90, there are options then. So if we feel we need to invest in our estate to continue tackling that 60% of the carbon emissions, we've considered several options which are summarised here. Really, the options are the speed, I guess, and the scale at which we could invest in the estate. So option 1 is to front load investment, so roughly £8 million up front, and try and deliver as much as we can in as short a space as possible. Now, clearly, the reason we haven't recommended that is not only because of the financial impact that would cause, and we've covered the budget report in the sort of short term already in a previous item, so that would put great pressure on that, or it would require us to reprioritise the capital programme at the loss of other items already approved by the authority. So clearly that has an impact and would need a decision by members. But equally, there's a bit around deliverability and also running too fast. So the strategy that obviously myself and my teams are trying to deliver is your strategy, which is to be net zero by 2050, not currently to be net zero by 2025, for example. So therefore, actually, we don't need to invest 8 million right now to stay on the trajectory to get to 2050. And there's a benefit of going at a more conservative pace, in the sense that technologies will continue to develop in this area, whether that be different technology solutions for double glazing, for example, or insulation, or the way in which you would harvest better solar PV capabilities on your site. So if we buy it all now, we'll get the product that's on the market now, but if we spread that in clearly over a period of time, we will benefit from better technologies down the line, which in theory should be more efficient or better performance. So there's an element of just managing that speed. Option 2, which is the recommended option, is therefore to target the low-lying fruit, if you like, the items which actually bring greatest carbon reduction and or bring a reduced financial financial payback. So that's what option 2 is predominantly focusing on. And alongside the estates piece, fleet colleagues would continue to replace electric vehicles at roughly 30 vehicles a year, so split between electric and hybrid, which allows us between now and 2030 to really be replacing at relative speed the fleet vehicles. I should emphasise none of those are being replaced early. That is just due to their natural ageing. They will then be replaced, but with a different vehicle engine. So the return on the investment in option 2 then has been calculated there of about 18 years on average, but that also generates an annual saving in utility costs of about £125,000 based on the current cost of our energy units. And this, we feel, provides the best payback in terms of the investment at a speed which allows us to be in the right place for 2030's milestone and on track for 2050. Option 2A is purely an additional enhancement of that, which is that we could do more for a slightly longer period and pick off some of the investments, particularly around double glazing and insulation, which we would otherwise be doing through our business as usual budgets. So clearly, if we were to protect the business as usual budgets, it allows us to make further enhancements to building fabric and the estate, and have sort of ring-fenced money, if you like, ring-fenced funding to do the carbon reduction work. So that increases from 500 to 650 a year and stretches that out over 8 years rather than 5 years. So just as a bit extra funding, but it would ultimately that would reduce the demand on the business as usual revenue budgets. And then option 3 is that we don't provide any additional funding at all, and we say this should be business as usual. The impact of doing that is that clearly we have a finite pot of money in to maintain the estate. So this would cause us to very slowly work towards net zero with a high risk that we would not be able to achieve it, and clearly would reduce spending on other building maintenance or fabric priorities that are set there in the design principles in our estate strategy. So therefore not what we're recommending. We feel like the scale of investment needed here does necessitate some form of additional funding. You can see the summary of those options in the graph, where option 3, the one I've just covered, is business as usual. We're okay until sort of 2024, 25, and then you can see the green line there go above the red, which is our target trajectory. So we feel like we will start to struggle to keep on top of the target. On page 93, there's a table which hopefully brings some clarity rather than confusion, but I appreciate it is quite complicated with the number of percentages and other things going on throughout the report. But it's trying to show the difference between those 4 options, if you like, from option 1, do everything, through to option 2, recommended, 2A, recommended with protecting the business as usual budget, and option 3, which is do it all in business as usual. So hopefully that helps summarise where we are. Very happy to take questions members may have from that.
Good, thank you, Matt. Members, Derek. I don't mean Derek, sorry, I mean Tony.
Thank you, Matt. You've asked most of my questions as you've gone through it, but I know option 1 doesn't have a return on investment time period on it. Is that known?
Sorry, option 1 doesn't have one.
I couldn't see a return on investment.
If you go to the page 93,
yeah.
It's got one at the bottom there, so it says a 50-year average.
50-year average, okay, thank you. You've talked about solar PV. Was any consideration given to wind turbines on our properties?
We haven't directly done that, purely due to normally planning and other considerations around its maintenance and use and risk. And equally, I think where we've, not to say we should rule it out, absolutely we shouldn't, and we'll have a look at it, when it comes. But I think generally solar is useful, it's reliable, we understand it, and it generates a good return on the energy. Yeah, so we do use that where appropriate, and equally we, particularly on a newer site, so it's very hard to do from a retrospective point of view. It's very costly, so you can do anything, but it's costly. On our new sites, so if you take Cosham, for example, we will be achieving a BREEAM standard for that. So there's an expectation around how you might use grey water harvesting and other elements of sustainability within that. So absolutely will be built into those kind of schemes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David.
Yes, thanks for the report. Do Her Majesty's Inspectorate judge us on our carbon reduction programme?
I don't believe they do specifically, no. anyone's got
Just,
content.
they don't now, but I've got a feeling they're going to.
Well, it would meet with my approval if they did.
Yeah, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Matt. Obviously, I'm one of the carbon champions. Everyone obviously couldn't make it today, and it's fair to say that Matt has been very candid in his discussions with myself and Cal Corker in relation to the generation of his paper and what's been put before you. And the type of questions we asked Matt was, some of this stuff, why has it not been done previously? LED lighting, double glazing, separating out the bays from the rest of the buildings, the doors. Why has it not been done previously? And I understand the prioritisation in terms of electric vehicle charging points and recognising that they wanted to have a formal estate assessment from the Carbon Trust. I accept all of that, and I'm really happy that with where we are now. But what I'm really keen to ensure is, as we work this through, is that where we look at the payback in your slides, so it's page 20. I don't want these on the graphic. Matt very kindly gave me a paper copy of this, but there are simple payback in years on some of these measures. And double glazing is actually, the payback is probably the worst. It's around about 2,000 years, I think it is that the payback. Could be wrong. No. It's a long time for double glazing to get it back. Return on investment years, 295 years to get it. But equally, it just makes sense. Some of them, though, really, really positively. Simple payback, LED, 7 years. It'll pay back, and it becomes a bonus. Gas boiler replacement, 6.5 years. Heat pumps, 31 years. So, and there are certain places where we won't be able to do heat pumps. So the point I'm trying to make is, I'm very happy that we do the things that are pragmatic and sensible to do, that will generate the best return, not in our investment, but also in terms of saving. But let's make sure we do known technologies. We should not be a technology test bed for such things as ground source heat pumps across the estate. I think there's one site in here where it might be useful, the whole of the estate, according to the paperwork I've read. So I'm very happy with option 2. I think that is the pragmatic way to go. It's an accurate assessment of funding over time. But I would encourage 2 things. Firstly, that we do concentrate on those ones that will get the quickest return. And secondly, where we're looking at, rather than as a capability by capability basis, we do take the time to look at a site. If we're going to put solar panels on a site and at the same time, the installation has not been done, maybe we should do the installation at the same time under the existing programme to make sure that we only touch the roof once. It's that type of synchronised rollout to ensure that A, we get the best results we can, B, the cheapest return, because I'm sure the more we do on a site at one go, the cheaper it will be, and C, we get the quickest return on our investment. So that would be my observations. Thank you.
Keith.
2 or 3 points. First of all, your graphs. I worry about the straight line, which says whatever it is, the required trajectory for net zero in 2050. I noticed it's changed from yellow to red between page 86 and 92. That's just a pedantic point, really. I don't think it is a straight line, you see, because I think some of the things you do first are the easiest, and you're going to end up at the other end struggling if you've got a line like that. So I think it should have a bend in it so that it's steeper at the beginning than it is at the end. I think that's a more realistic way of actually indicating, because what tends to happen with all these is we all look below the line and they all flatten out. The actual flattens out towards the end of the period because the savings are harder and harder to get. The second point to make is that it's a difficult one, this. Everyone's going electric. I just think we need to think very carefully when we go all the way, because I happen to believe that sustainable fuels, which are obviously are hydrocarbon fuels, but nonetheless are grown in a sustainable way, will actually be increasingly the way. Some of the move towards 2050 and zero carbon neutrality, I think is a better way of putting it, happens. So I think we should keep an eye on that before we go launching straight off into electrifying everything with lithium batteries. Apart from that, I support the proposal about option 2. I think it's the right way forward. But as I say, and I would certainly go along with Gary, you've got to concentrate on the things that give you the best return first. And those are things we should be doing anyway. And we do not want to be a leader in some of this. And the final point I'd make is that I presume we're looking at ways in which we can get extra funding from government to do some of the things we want to do. You know, we were lucky in the county council, and I don't know whether the fire service could have been part of that particular bid we made, where suddenly the government, as they do occasionally, suddenly say, oh, well, there's this money, it's got to be spent by the end of the year. So that sort of negates about 80% of the people that are going to apply. And we got £29 million to do a lot of the stuff that you're doing now. So I'd certainly plug into the county council's network to ensure that when the government suddenly decide they're going to throw money at a particular issue, like insulation, we grab some of it. Okay, Roger.
Thank you. On the chart on page 93, if the third item down, increase the level of building insulation across the estate, which is in option 1, the estimated annual saving is £27,000. If that was also in 2, that would give you £152,000 a year saving. What are the implications of doing that and just carrying that one into 2 in the way of cost to do it and also ability to do it?
So I haven't got that exact detail, but obviously you're starting to move into 2A. So the only difference between 2 and 2A there, if you add insulation into 2, is the double glazing. So in effect, you're sort of asking, is there a 2B without to do 2A without the double glazing? But so there will be a unit cost for how much that will be. I don't have that in front of me, but clearly that would return investment. What I've said earlier in the chapter, one of the chapters earlier on, is if we do option 2, we will try and do some of the other things through business as usual. So the installation is one of those ones that I've listed earlier on. So we might not achieve it all, so you might not get the whole 27,000 saving, but we will increase insulation through our business as usual budgets. Clearly we could decide that actually, you could decide that you want to increase option 2's funding to allow for more insulation to be undertaken, but I can't quantify that for you right this second. We'd have to go away and find that figure to exactly how much that would be. Does that sort of answer your question, Councillor Price?
Sorry, Matt, for your response to Councillor Price just sets up a supplementary for me. In your current business as usual model, how many years do you think it's going to take you to put the insulation in the buildings? Because you're saying under option 2, you could do it in that and as part of the element, which is a 5-year programme. If the current increase the level of building insulation across the estate, if you want to do that, what's the current scheduled programme under business as usual?
So we have a 15-year programme. Yeah, which is where you're starting then to go into option 3, which is do it as business as usual. So we wouldn't be saying we could achieve all of the insulation through business as usual in option 2 without additional funding. So over the next decades, call it, we will do some insulation improvements, which will start to provide returns on that, but it isn't the same as up-fronting that money now and saying go and sort the insulation. Does that answer your question, Councillor Hughes?
I don't want to labour the point, but it's worth making. But I'm going to, yeah, because if you're going to install photovoltaic cells into a roof and you're up there already, it would just makes good economic sense to say actually maybe we should look at the insulation in this roof, and if it's not sufficient, make sure we do it while we're here. And it's that sort of sequencing of outputs to ensure that you get the best bang for your buck when you're up there doing this work.
Yes, exactly. So that's where, if that was the case, where you were putting solar, so that don't want to get too technical, but clearly you put solar panels outside of the roof and you put insulation inside of the roof. So you can do insulation internally within the building, going into the loft space and putting insulation in, for example, without needing to do that when you put solar PV on the external side of a roof. Equally, solar PV can also go on flat roofs, different types of roofs, which have different types of insulation makeup. So it really depends on, this is where we're saying we will do some insulation, because there will be some sites where actually you might be replacing the roof as a business as usual project, And in stripping that roof off, when you put it back on, you put additional insulation in and you put sort of PV on top of it. So that would be where we would have achieved some of that insulation without additional funding from the authority. But what we're saying what we wouldn't do is purposefully go and put loads of insulation in everywhere because we wouldn't have the funding to do it.
Tony?
Thank you. We've talked a lot about return on investment, and that's very important, and value for money is very important. I just wouldn't want to lose sight that we're doing this because we have to, for actually much bigger reasons than financial ones, and there's a certain inevitability about us having to do this.
Anyone else? I would say I would be inclined to option 2 for what's been said in here already, and what Matt said about making sure that we have, in a fast-changing world, the best kit available as we go through. I say this as one who bought Betamax and 8-track car stereo. I know some of you don't even know what I'm talking about, but so that's the way I would go. Matt, anything to conclude?
No, thank you. No.
Chief? Okay, so if we can go to page 95, which is the recommendation, which is that subject to approval of funding, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approves the programme of work set out in option 2 to improve thermal efficiency of buildings and renewable energy generation over the next 5 years at a cost of £500,000 per year. And secondly, that Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approve the adoption of the National Sustainability Charter at Appendix B as part of the Carbon Reduction Pathway Objectives. Approved? Okay, thank you very much. Now, members, we move to item 12, which is shutting off the outside world for our exclusion items. So, Sparks, if you could pull the plug.